Hello, my name is Author. I am the author of a book about the Crusades. And I'm here to talk to you about whether the Crusades brought progress or destruction. So there have been many books and movies and documentaries about the Crusades. Usually they focus on battles, sieges, famous leaders like Richard the Lionheart and Saladin. But I wanted to write a different kind of book about the Crusades. I wanted to look at how people lived under the Crusader states. So in my book, I tell the story of the Crusades through the experiences of ordinary people who lived in Crusader Jerusalem. Through their story, I tried to answer this question of whether the Crusades brought progress or destruction. First, let's define our terms. When we say progress, we usually mean advancements in things like technology, culture, economics. By destruction, we mean death, destruction, loss of cultural heritage. So with those definitions in mind, let's talk about the Crusades. The Crusades were a series of religious campaigns that took place between the 11th and 13th centuries. They were launched by European Christians to recapture the Holy Land, which had been conquered by Muslims in the 7th century. Today, we remember for major crusades, but there were actually 8 crusades over the course of 2 centuries. I focus on the First Crusade, which began in 1095. That's because it was the first time that European Christians established a permanent state in the Middle East. The First Crusade started when Pope Urban II called for a holy war to take Jerusalem, which was then ruled by Muslim Seljuk Turks. But what motivated people to join the crusade? Well, some were driven by a desire for adventure or by the chance to acquire wealth. Others really believed they were doing God's work. And still others joined for a combination of reasons. It wasn't just noble warriors who joined the crusade. Men of all social classes participated, as did women. One woman wrote that she joined the crusade to escape an abusive husband. Another said that she went to wash the feet of pilgrims on their way to the Holy Land. Even children joined the crusade. Thousands of young boys left their homes and marched across Europe to join the Holy War. When the Crusaders arrived in the Middle East, they faced fierce resistance from the Muslims. But after years of fighting, they captured Jerusalem in 1099. At the time, Jerusalem was a bustling trading center and home to people of many different religions. But the Crusaders didn't care about that. After they captured the city, they went on a rampage and killed hundreds, perhaps thousands of Muslims, Jews, and even fellow Christians who refused to convert to Catholicism. The Crusaders divided the city into 2, one part for non-Muslims and one part for Jews and Muslims. They also set up a special court to try people accused of heresy. After the capture of Jerusalem, 4 Crusader states were established in the Levant: the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the County of Edessa, the Principality of Antioch, and the County of Tripoli. These states lasted for almost 200 years. During that time, the relationship between the Crusaders and the Muslims changed. In the early years, the Crusader states were constantly at war with Muslim forces. But as time went on, the two sides began to coexist more peacefully. In fact, trade between Crusader and Muslim states increased dramatically during the 12th century. This trade brought great wealth to the Crusader states, but it also led to cultural exchange. One of the most important things that the Crusaders brought to the Middle East was gunpowder. In fact, the first gunpowder weapon ever used in the Middle East was a cannon that the Crusaders brought with them. But the Crusaders didn't just bring gunpowder. They also brought new technologies for building castles, for farming, for mining. They also brought new ideas from Europe. For example, the Crusaders were responsible for introducing the Gothic style of architecture to the Middle East. Of course, these cultural exchanges went in both directions. The Crusaders learned a lot from the Muslims, especially in the areas of medicine and astronomy. In fact, many of the medical texts that European doctors used during the Middle Ages were written in Arabic. Economically, the Crusader states were a success. They quickly became wealthy due to the trade that they conducted with Muslim states. The Crusader states were especially good at producing agricultural products like wine and olive oil. They also had a number of skilled craftsmen who made items like glass, textiles, and metalwork. The prosperity of the Crusader states is best exemplified by the city of Acre. In the 12th century, it was one of the most important trading centers in the Mediterranean. Politically, however, the Crusader states were a failure. They were constantly fighting with each other and with the Muslims. In fact, the Crusader states were never able to unite against a common enemy. This constant fighting drained the state's resources and made it hard for them to grow. Despite the efforts of some rulers, the Crusader states were eventually defeated by the Muslims. In 1187, a Muslim leader named Saladin captured Jerusalem. This was a major blow to the Crusaders because it meant that they had lost the city that had started the Crusades. Over the next few decades, the Crusaders were pushed back further and further until they had lost all of their territory in the Middle East. In summary, the Crusades were a complicated and controversial period in history. They brought about many changes in the Middle East and Europe, some good and some bad. The Crusades had a big impact on the relationship between Christianity and Islam. The Crusades are often seen as a clash between these two religions, but that's not really accurate. The Crusades were more of a clash between two versions of Christianity, Roman Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy. The relationship between the Crusaders and the Muslims was complicated. Sometimes the Crusaders and the Muslims fought each other, but sometimes they traded with each other and even helped each other out. Overall, though, the Crusades were destructive. They caused a lot of death and suffering, and they also led to the spread of religious intolerance. Well, I hope that answers the question. Did the Crusades bring progress or destruction? You decide. Thank you. Hey everyone, when you think of the Crusades, what comes to mind? Scenes of carnage, tales of valor, perhaps the imposing figure of Saladin, or the sinister specter of God's wrath? Whatever your thoughts, one thing is clear, the Crusades were no walk in the park. But between the battles, sieges, and political intrigue, did the Crusaders and the people they encountered actually get to know each other? If so, did they develop any sort of affection for one another? Welcome to my channel. And today, let's find out if the Crusades were actually a love-hate relationship. You know, I've always found it fascinating how the Crusades have captured the public imagination. They are often portrayed as these massive European campaigns to conquer the Holy Land, but the story is much more intricate than that. In reality, they were a series of sporadic events over 2 centuries that had a profound impact on both Europe and the Middle East. Now, imagine yourself as a Crusader knight arriving in the Levant. What would you have experienced? How would you have interacted with the locals? We'll delve into the Crusader states, the social dynamics between Europeans and Middle Easterners, and explore how perceptions shaped relationships. We'll even touch upon some of the interesting personal stories that emerged from this unique historical context. So fasten your seatbelts, because we're about to embark on a journey back to a time when cultures clashed and sometimes surprisingly connected. Now, before we dive into the main topic of whether the Crusades were a love-hate relationship, let's talk about the elephant in the room. The word crusade evokes images of religious zealots wreaking havoc. But hold on, because the story is more nuanced than that. The First Crusade, sparked by Pope Urban II's call to arms in 1095, wasn't just about reclaiming the Holy Land. It was also a response to pleas from the Byzantine Emperor Alexios Komnenos for help against the encroaching Seljuk Turks. This aspect often gets overshadowed, but it's crucial to understanding the complexities of the Crusades. It was a reaction to the changing dynamics of power in the Eastern Mediterranean, not just a wanton desire for conquest. Now, picture this. You're a seasoned Crusader knight ready to answer the call of holy war. But then you stumble upon a group of local villagers going about their daily lives. What would you have seen? How would you have reacted? We Lions delve into the everyday realities of life under Crusader rule and examine how the ideals of the Crusades played out in practice. You Lions get a glimpse into the cultural norms and values of the time and see how they shape the interactions between Crusaders and the local population. Prepare to be surprised by the complexities of this period, Because the Crusades weren't just about epic battles. They were also about the everyday experiences of people caught up in a historical event. As we progress through the narrative, we'll uncover the surprising ways in which the Crusades became a melting pot of cultures, ideas, and ambitions. So stay tuned and get ready to challenge your preconceived notions about this pivotal moment in history. So here's a scenario to consider. Imagine yourself as a European merchant traveling to the Levant during the height of the Crusades. You're eager to explore new markets and establish trade routes. But how do you navigate the complex web of alliances, rivalries, and tensions that define this era? We'll guide you through the key players, including the Crusader states, neighboring Muslim principalities, and the Byzantine Empire. You'll learn about their motivations, goals, and how they interacted with outsiders. But it doesn't stop there. We'll also explore the role of religion in shaping these interactions. From the clash of Christianity and Islam to the influence of Byzantine orthodoxy, you'll gain insights into how faith shaped diplomacy, trade, and daily life. Picture this: you're at a bustling marketplace in Jerusalem, a melting pot of European, Muslim, and Eastern Christian traders. How do you navigate the cultural differences and forge connections that could lead to fruitful partnerships? We'll delve into the intricacies of intercultural communication, negotiation, and the challenges of maintaining business relationships amidst political tensions. Get ready to step into the shoes of a medieval merchant and discover the strategies, skills, and cultural awareness needed to thrive in this dynamic environment. However, the Crusades were more than just a clash of cultures. They were a defining moment in European history. If you've ever wondered how the Crusades shaped the course of medieval Europe, prepare to be amazed. We'll take you on a journey through the key events, figures, and consequences that defined this era. Discover how the Crusades influenced the growth of European kingdoms, the expansion of trade networks, and the evolution of warfare tactics. But we won't stop there. The Crusades also left an indelible mark on European society, politics, and culture, and we'll guide you through these transformations, exploring their lasting impact on medieval Europe. But let's shift our focus to the Crusaders themselves. These European warriors weren't just ruthless conquerors. They were individuals driven by a complex mix of motivations. We'll delve into the factors that drove them to participate in the Crusades, from religious zeal to personal ambition, and as we peel back the layers of this historical event, you'll discover the humanity behind the stereotypes. Prepare to be captivated by the stories of bravery, conviction, and personal struggles that define the Crusaders. Finally, the Crusades didn't happen in a vacuum. They unfolded against the backdrop of a shifting political landscape. We'll bring this era to life by exploring the key players, including the Crusader states, neighboring Muslim principalities, and the Byzantine Empire. Discover how their interactions shaped the course of the Crusades and the lasting impact they had on the region. In conclusion, the Crusades were a tapestry woven with threads of religion, politics, economics, and culture. They offer a unique lens through which to view medieval history, challenging us to confront uncomfortable truths while celebrating the resilience of the human spirit. As we bring this journey to a close, consider how the Crusades continue to resonate in our world today. Their legacy is a reminder of the complexities of history and the enduring quest for understanding in an ever-changing world. We've journeyed through the motivations, experiences, and lasting impacts of the Crusades. Now it's time to hear from you. What surprised you the most about the Crusades? Did you learn something that challenged your preconceived notions? Share your thoughts and join the conversation. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button to stay connected to my channel. Together, let's keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep unraveling the mysteries of our shared history. Thanks for joining me on this journey through time. Until next time, stay curious, keep exploring, and remember that history has the power to connect us across the ages. Thanks for watching. As we all know, the Crusades were a series of religious campaigns in which European Christians fought to reclaim the Holy Land from Muslim rule. While commonly remembered for their violent and intolerant nature, The Crusades also had an unexpected and profound impact on the course of European history. During their extended campaigns in the Near East, European crusaders frequently came into contact with the sophisticated civilizations of the region, most notably the Arab world. This engagement resulted in an unprecedented transfer of knowledge, ideas, and innovations that bridged the gap between medieval Europe and the advanced societies of the Islamic East. As a consequence, the Crusades inadvertently catalyzed a remarkable transformation in Europe, setting the stage for its later intellectual and technological renaissance. Let's start with what might seem the most surprising: Europe's acquisition of advanced medical knowledge. Arab physicians during the Islamic Golden Age made significant strides in various fields of medicine, compiling extensive medical encyclopedias and making groundbreaking discoveries. Scholars like Avicenna, Ibn Sina, and Al-Razi synthesized the works of ancient Greek medical authorities like Hippocrates and Galen with their own empirical findings. Their medical texts, including the Canon of Medicine and the Comprehensive Book of Medicine, became standard works in European universities after being translated into Latin. But it wasn't just about the content of these texts, it was also about the methods. Arab hospitals, far more advanced than their European counterparts, featured specialized wards, systematic record-keeping, and treatments based on observation rather than superstition. For European crusaders who ventured into these hospitals for treatment, often following injuries or illnesses sustained during their campaigns, it was a revelation. They returned home with not only newfound medical knowledge, but also a desire to improve the state of medical practice in their own societies. This exposure to advanced medical thinking is believed to have been instrumental in shifting Europe away from the relatively unscientific practices of the Dark Ages towards a more empirical and systematic approach to healing. Furthermore, the Crusades had a lasting impact on Europe's understanding of mathematics and astronomy. The Arabic numeral system, including the concept of zero, was far more efficient than the Roman numeral system in use in medieval Europe. European contact with the highly developed Hindu-Arabic numeral system through Arab scholars prompted a gradual shift away from the cumbersome Roman system, allowing for more complex calculations and advancements in fields such as engineering and commerce. Similarly, Arab astronomers had made significant refinements to the astrolabe, an instrument used for navigation and timekeeping. Their detailed celestial observations also led to corrections in Ptolemaic astronomy. European astronomers built upon these foundations, incorporating the improved instruments and revised theories into their own work, eventually contributing to the scientific revolution of the later centuries. One of the most visible legacies of the Crusades can be seen in the realm of architecture. European crusaders were deeply impressed by the towering fortresses and elaborate castles of the Middle East, many of which were constructed using Islamic architectural styles and techniques. To counter threats from both internal and external enemies, European rulers began investing in fortifications that could withstand prolonged sieges. Inspired by their experiences during the Crusades, European architects incorporated elements of Islamic and Byzantine military architecture into their designs. This led to the construction of more sophisticated castles and fortifications across Europe, characterized by concentric designs, advanced masonry techniques, and the use of features such as machicolations. But it wasn't just defensive structures that were influenced by Crusader exposure to Islamic architecture. The aesthetic elements of Islamic architecture, such as pointed arches, intricate mosaics, and geometric patterns, also found their way into European building design. These influences are particularly evident in the later Gothic cathedrals of Europe, where functionality met artistic grandeur. Moreover, the Crusades had a profound impact on military technology. European knights encountered a range of new weapons and military technologies during their campaigns in the Middle East. Greek fire, an early form of napalm used by the Byzantines against the attackers, amazed European military minds. Crossbows with greater range and power were also noted, as were improved siege engines such as the trebuchet. These technological advancements forced European militaries to adapt and innovate in order to keep up with their adversaries. The adoption of these technologies led to significant changes in the nature of warfare in Europe, with more emphasis on ranged weaponry and siege tactics. The need to produce better armor and weapons spurred advancements in metallurgy and mechanical engineering. Military engineers studied the designs of both European and Islamic weapons and fortifications, leading to a gradual improvement in military infrastructure and tactics. Even the military strategies and tactics employed by the opposing forces were carefully observed and analyzed by European military thinkers, shaping military doctrines for centuries to come. In addition to the exchange of technology, the Crusades also facilitated substantial trade between Europe and the Middle East. The establishment of Crusader states in the Levant created permanent trade routes connecting Europe to markets in the East. Through these routes, Europeans gained access to a wide array of goods, including luxury items such as silk, spices, and glassware, but the trade wasn't one-sided. European merchants brought products from their home regions, including textiles, glass, and manufactured goods, to the Eastern markets. This trade not only enriched the economies of the participating regions, but also fostered cultural exchanges and diplomatic relations. Moreover, Crusader exposure to advanced agricultural techniques in the Middle East had a profound impact on European farming practices. Arab farmers had developed sophisticated irrigation systems and crop rotation methods that significantly increased agricultural productivity. European farmers adopted these techniques, improving soil fertility and crop yields. Additionally, the introduction of new crops such as sugar, citrus fruits, and cotton diversified European agriculture and stimulated economic growth. The exchange of agricultural knowledge and products during the Crusades contributed to a significant enhancement in European farming practices and diets. Another critical aspect of the Crusades' impact on Europe was the revival of classical knowledge. Many ancient Greek and Roman texts, particularly those related to science, philosophy, and literature, had been preserved and expanded upon by Arab scholars. During the Crusades, European scholars had the opportunity to study and translate these works, reintroducing classical ideas to the West. Cities like Toledo, Sicily, and Antioch became centers of translation, with scholars working to make ancient texts accessible to a wider European audience. This rediscovery of classical learning, sometimes referred to as the First Renaissance, sparked intellectual curiosity and laid the foundation for the Renaissance that would unfold in later centuries. The Crusades also played a role in the establishment of universities in Europe. Inspired by the Islamic centers of learning, such as the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, European leaders began to establish institutions dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge. These universities initially focused on theology and law, gradually expanded to include other subjects, fostering the exchange of ideas and the training of scholars. The influence of Islamic thought on European universities was particularly significant, as it introduced a more systematic and empirical approach to learning. Finally, it is important to acknowledge that while the Crusades did facilitate the transfer of knowledge between Europe and the Islamic East, this exchange was not equal or always positive. European attitudes towards Islamic civilization were often marked by prejudice and hostility, influenced by religious differences and stereotypes. However, despite these biases, the practical benefits of interacting with Islamic society were undeniable. European scholars and adventurers who engaged more directly with Islamic culture often developed more nuanced perspectives, recognizing the contributions of Muslim scholars and the sophistication of Islamic civilization. Nevertheless, it is crucial to remember that the Crusades were primarily a violent and intolerant undertaking aimed at the very civilizations whose knowledge and innovations helped shape Europe's future. The resulting exchange of ideas occurred within a context of conflict and prejudice, making it all the more remarkable. In conclusion, the Crusades stand as a pivotal moment in the history of European development, bridging the gap between the medieval and modern eras. The prolonged conflicts between European Christians and the advanced civilizations of the Near East, particularly the Arab world, resulted in an unprecedented exchange of knowledge, ideas, and innovations. European exposure to Islamic medicine, mathematics, astronomy, architecture, and warfare led to significant transformations in these fields, shaping the intellectual and technological landscape of medieval Europe. The Crusades thus played a crucial role in catalyzing the conditions that allowed Europe to emerge from the Dark Ages and set the stage for the innovations that would define the modern world. The legacy of this encounter between civilizations serves as a powerful reminder that even in times of conflict, the flow of ideas remains an unstoppable force of progress. The Crusades, a series of religious and military campaigns spanning from the late 11th to the late 13th centuries, profoundly reshaped the social hierarchies and roles within medieval Europe. These expeditions, initially launched to reclaim the Holy Land from Muslim control, had far-reaching consequences that extended beyond the battlefield, influencing the structure of feudal society, the rise of new social classes, and the transformation of cultural and economic dynamics. So what were the major effects of the Crusades? Well, let's find out. Before the Crusades, European society was rigidly structured under the feudal system, where power was concentrated in the hands of monarchs, nobility, and the church. The vast majority of the population consisted of peasants bound to the land, with little social mobility. However, the Crusades disrupted this static order in several ways. One of the most significant changes was the decline of traditional feudal obligations. Many nobles and knights, eager to gain wealth, land, and spiritual rewards, embarked on crusades, often selling or mortgaging their estates to finance their journeys. This led to a redistribution of land and wealth, weakening the power of the traditional aristocracy. For example, during the First Crusade, many French nobles left their lands in the hands of their wives or other relatives while they went on crusade. This not only disrupted the normal feudal system of inheritance, but also gave women a chance to manage estates and exercise political influence. When these nobles didn't return from the crusade, as was often the case, it led to further complications and changes in land ownership. Some lesser nobles and knights who survived the Crusades returned with newfound wealth and prestige, while others perished, leaving their lands to be claimed by monarchs or more opportunistic lords. While the redistribution of land and wealth was significant, it wasn't even the most significant change brought about by the Crusades. That distinction belongs to the rise of a money-based economy. See, before the Crusades, European armies traveled to the east. They encountered advanced trading networks in the Byzantine and Islamic worlds. The demand for supplies, transportation, and mercenaries stimulated commerce, leading to the growth of towns and cities. For example, Venice and Genoa grew rapidly as Italian merchants seized the opportunity to supply crusading armies traveling to the Holy Land through their ports. Similarly, along the major pilgrimage routes to Santiago de Compostela in Spain and to the Holy Land, towns and inns sprang up catering to the needs of travelers. Urban centers became hubs of economic activity, fostering the emergence of a new merchant class. These merchants, once considered socially inferior to the landed nobility, gained wealth and influence, gradually challenging the traditional feudal hierarchy. In fact, as the Crusades continued and trade networks expanded, the wealth generated by merchants helped fund the construction of magnificent churches and cathedrals across Europe. But don't think for a second that the church wasn't doing the same. Another critical transformation was the changing role of the church. The Pope and religious orders, such as the Templars and Hospitallers, gained immense power by promoting and organizing the Crusades. For instance, after Pope Urban II called for the First Crusade in 1095, he established the Order of the Templars in 1118 to protect pilgrims on their way to the Holy Land. Over time, the Templars evolved into a powerful military force, owning vast estates and wielding significant political clout. The Church's ability to mobilize armies, collect taxes, and grant spiritual indulgences enhanced its political authority. Moreover, the participation of monks and friars in the Crusades contributed to the spread of religious orders throughout Europe. These orders, dedicated to various charitable and missionary activities, played a vital role in social welfare, education, and the conversion of pagans and heretics alike. However, the failure of later Crusades and the Church's involvement in violent conflicts also led to growing criticism, sowing the seeds for future religious reforms. Now, while all these changes were happening among the nobility and the church, the Crusades also affected the lower classes, too. And no group was more central to medieval life than the peasants. The immediate impact of the Crusades on peasants was often devastating. Many peasants who joined the Crusades, either out of religious fervor or the hope of escaping serfdom, often found themselves disillusioned. For example, the Second Crusade, which began in 1147, aimed to recapture the city of Edessa in Syria from Muslim forces. The campaign resulted in heavy losses and the deaths of many European soldiers and peasants. Those who did return sometimes brought back new ideas and skills, contributing to gradual social changes. Furthermore, the increased demand for labor in towns provided some peasants with opportunities to leave manorial estates, further eroding the feudal system. However, this exodus of rural workers also led to new problems. For example, when there aren't enough people working the fields because they've gone on crusade, the amount of food available for consumption drops. This could lead to widespread famine and death, and the lack of workers also meant that the amount of goods produced dropped, which affected the amount of taxes the king was getting and could destabilize his reign. But what about women? How did the Crusades affect them? Well, not really in any positive way. Although women were largely excluded from direct participation in the Crusades due to safety concerns and traditional gender roles, they still experienced significant impacts. During the Crusades, women primarily participated indirectly by managing households, estates, and businesses in the absence of men who went on crusade. For instance, when nobles departed for the Holy Land, their wives and daughters took charge of their properties, making decisions regarding agricultural production, labor, and distribution of resources. Some women, like Eleanor of Aquitaine, wielded considerable political influence, forming strategic alliances and exercising power in their own right. However, the overall impact of the Crusades on women's status was mixed. While some women gained experience and skills through managing estates, the Church's emphasis on martial piety and traditional gender roles ultimately reinforced their subordinate position in society. Finally, let's talk about the cultural effects of the Crusades. Despite the violence and conflict, the Crusades fostered cultural exchanges between Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. European contact with Muslim scholars and thinkers exposed them to advancements in medicine, science, and philosophy, which later contributed to the Renaissance. For example, European travelers like Albertus Magnus and William of Rubric documented their encounters with diverse cultures and people, bringing back tales that challenged existing perceptions and stereotypes. These accounts sparked curiosity and interest in exploring the wider world, paving the way for increased trade and cultural exchanges. Additionally, the exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies further integrated Europe into a broader world system, diminishing its previous isolation. However, it's essential to acknowledge that these cultural exchanges occurred amidst hostility and prejudice. The Crusades were primarily motivated by religious zeal and conquest, often resulting in violence and destruction. The clash of cultures sometimes manifested in intolerance and the spread of negative stereotypes, underscoring the complex and multifaceted nature of the Crusades as both a catalyst for cultural exchange and a source of conflict. In conclusion, the Crusades were a pivotal period in medieval European history. They marked a turning point in the social, economic, cultural, and religious landscape of the continent. The Crusades weakened the feudal order, stimulated economic and urban growth, and altered the balance of power among the nobility, church, and emerging merchant class. While the immediate military objectives of the Crusades often ended in failure, their long-term social consequences laid the groundwork for the transition from the medieval to the early modern era. The effects of the Crusades continue to be debated and analyzed by historians today. Understanding their significance allows us to gain a deeper appreciation for the complexities of medieval history and the factors that shape the modern world. Thank you for watching. The history of the Crusades is filled with epic tales of valor, faith, and conquest. Often lost in the larger narrative is the economic motivation behind these expeditions. Did the Crusaders fight just for God, or were there tangible material benefits to be gained? Welcome back to the channel. Today, we explore the economic impact of the Crusades and answer the question, were the economic benefits resulting from expanded trade between East and West worth the immense violence that accompanied these wars? The year is 1095 and Pope Urban II stands before a crowd gathered at the Council of Clermont. His words resonate through the square, urging the assembled men to liberate the Holy Land from the clutches of the infidels. Answering the Pope's call, thousands of European nobles and commoners alike set out on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. But as they journey across France and Italy, whispers of another kind of reward begin to circulate. News spreads of vast fortunes waiting to be seized in the eastern cities, fanning the flames of desire for riches among the ranks. And so it begins, the First Crusade, a seemingly religious expedition tinged with the lust for gold. At first glance, the connection between the violent enterprise and the world of commerce seems tenuous. After all, the stated purpose of the Crusades was to reclaim Jerusalem and the surrounding areas, which had fallen under Muslim rule. Over the next centuries, major crusades would be launched, each with the objective of expanding Christian territory in the Levant. Yet buried beneath the narratives of heroism and martyrdom lie the beginnings of a commercial revolution. In the early medieval period, trade between Western Europe and the prosperous Islamic world was limited and fraught with peril. Most of the action was confined to the Mediterranean coast, with established routes connecting the main commercial hubs. The Byzantine Empire held significant sway over trade in the eastern Mediterranean, regulating shipping and collecting duties along the way. Italian maritime republics such as Venice and Genoa also enjoyed prominent positions, acting as intermediaries in the exchange of goods between the two regions. The prospect of tapping into the lucrative markets of the East beckoned European merchants, but the journey was perilous, often impeded by rough seas, hostile local rulers, or the infamous Arab pirates. This reality left the full potential of trade between the two worlds largely untapped, with Europeans having only a limited understanding of what the East had to offer. With the advent of the Crusades, everything changes. As European knights and nobles descended upon the Levant, new trade routes opened up, bypassing traditional hubs and introducing a flood of novel goods into Western markets. Among the most sought after were the luxurious products of the Islamic world, including silk, spices, ornate glass, and rare dyes. These items not only enriched the lives of Europeans, but also sparked envy and avarice, further fueling the desire for conquest and control. But let's delve deeper into the economic impact of the Crusades. To fully understand this complex phenomenon, we must examine both sides of the equation. On the one hand, the establishment of Crusader states in the Levant disrupted the existing power structure and led to the emergence of new economic centers. Cities like Acre and Tyre became vital hubs for the exchange of goods between East and West. Crusader rulers recognized the importance of trade and often granted merchants generous tax breaks and other incentives to encourage commerce within their states. Furthermore, the presence of foreign merchants and the need to cater to their needs led to the development of new industries and services. For example, the demand for food, particularly fresh provisions, stimulated the growth of agriculture and food processing. To feed the growing population of cities like Jerusalem, settlers introduced new crops and livestock, diversifying the local economy. Moreover, the Crusades also served as a catalyst for the growth of Italian maritime republics. Cities like Venice and Genoa provided logistical and military support for the campaigns in exchange for concessions and trade rights in the eastern Mediterranean. These agreements often gave Italian merchants exclusive access to certain goods or exempted them from customs duties, fostering closer ties between the two regions. Venetian merchants, for instance, gained control of key trade routes in the eastern Mediterranean, ensuring their dominance in the region's commercial network. However, examining the economic impact of the Crusades solely through the lens of trade and commerce provides an incomplete picture. A darker side of the story lies in the violence that accompanied these expeditions. The Crusades were marked by periods of intense bloodshed and destruction, and the economic consequences of this violence were profound. The sack of Jerusalem in 1099, for instance, resulted in the massacre of thousands of Muslims and Jews, highlighting the brutality that permeated these conflicts. Similarly, the fall of major Islamic cities like Damietta and Tripoli led to the displacement of populations and the disruption of trade networks, causing significant economic losses. Furthermore, the very nature of the Crusades contributed to an atmosphere of distrust and hostility between the two regions. The religious zeal that drove European Christians to seize control of the Holy Land also fostered intolerance and animosity towards those who followed different faiths. This tension often spilled over into the economic sphere, leading to discriminatory policies and restrictions on trade. For example, Crusader rulers sometimes imposed high taxes on Muslim merchants or limited their access to certain markets, hindering the growth of a truly inclusive commercial network. Despite the turbulence, the economic impact of the Crusades continued to reverberate throughout medieval Europe. The influx of new goods from the East sparked interest and demand, leading to the growth of merchant classes and the establishment of new financial institutions. As trade flourished, cities along the Mediterranean coast, such as those in Italy and Spain, became centers of commerce and finance. This economic activity also contributed to the growth of universities and the spread of literacy as merchants sought to improve their financial literacy and keep accurate records of their transactions. However, the true cost of these economic gains may have been much higher than initially meets the eye. While trade flourished, it was often overshadowed by the constant threat of violence and the dehumanizing treatment of those caught in the crossfire. Entire villages and cities were obliterated, entire cultures displaced, leaving behind a legacy of hatred and mistrust. The human cost of this expansion cannot be measured in mere economic terms. Some historians argue that the violence associated with the Crusades was not unique to the medieval era, but rather a common feature of warfare regardless of the participants. They point to the numerous instances of pillage and brutality during contemporary conflicts, suggesting that the Crusades were not an anomaly, but rather a reflection of the times. Others contend that the Crusades had a profound impact on shaping the cultural and intellectual landscape of Europe, facilitating the transfer of Arab and Greek knowledge to the West. They highlight the role of contact between different civilizations in fostering innovation and the exchange of ideas, arguing that this cultural enrichment laid the foundation for the European Renaissance. Ultimately, the question of whether the violence was necessary to achieve the economic benefits associated with the Crusades remains a subject of debate. The historical record provides ample evidence of the brutality and devastation wrought by these conflicts, while also showcasing the economic opportunities they presented. Evaluating the human cost of violence against the backdrop of material gains is a complex and emotionally charged undertaking. As we reflect on the legacy of the Crusades, it is essential to acknowledge the atrocities committed in the name of religion and conquest. The massacres, the subjugation, and the displacement of entire communities serve as stark reminders of the darkest aspects of human nature. Yet it is equally important to recognize the profound impact these events had on the course of history. The Crusades represent a pivotal moment in the interconnectedness of civilizations, a testament to the human desire for exploration, trade, and the pursuit of faith. In conclusion, the economic impact of the Crusades was multifaceted and far-reaching. While the stated objectives of these expeditions were rooted in religion, the desire for economic gain played a significant role in driving the ambitions of European rulers and merchants alike. The Crusades led to the establishment of new trade routes and the introduction of novel goods to European markets, stimulating economic growth and the development of new industries. However, this economic progress was often overshadowed by the violence and destruction that accompanied these campaigns. The human cost of this expansion, the displacement and mistreatment of local populations, cannot be ignored. Ultimately, the question of whether the economic benefits of the Crusades outweighed their immeasurable human cost remains a matter of perspective and ethical considerations. History serves as a reminder of the complexities of human ambition and the lasting impact of our actions on the course of civilizations. Thank you for joining us on this journey through time. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to show your support and subscribe for more historical insights. Until next time, keep exploring the past and stay curious. The Crusades, a series of religious and military campaigns spanning nearly 2 centuries, remain one of the most debated episodes in medieval history. Scholars and historians have long grappled with the question of whether these expeditions contributed more to the advancement of knowledge or the destruction of peace. To understand this complex legacy, one must delve into the intricate interplay between cultural exchange, intellectual progress, and the brutal realities of war that defined the Crusades. To get started, we first have to look at the beginnings of the Crusades, which can be traced back to the late 11th century when Pope Urban II called for the liberation of Jerusalem from Muslim control. The immediate trigger for the First Crusade was the appeal of Byzantine Emperor Alexios Komnenos for military aid against the encroaching Seljuk Turks. This call, however, coincided with a broader context of religious fervor and European ambitions. Motivated by a desire to recapture the Holy Land, European Christians responded enthusiastically to the papal call, launching a wave of military campaigns that would last until the early 13th century. The First Crusade succeeded in capturing Jerusalem in 1099, but this victory was marked by immense bloodshed, setting a precedent for centuries of conflict. The subsequent Crusades, some successful, others disastrous, further entrenched hostilities between Christian and Muslim worlds, leaving a trail of devastation in their wake. However, amidst the violence, the Crusades also facilitated unprecedented interactions between East and West. The Islamic world, particularly during the medieval period, was a beacon of scientific, philosophical, and medical knowledge. Cities like Baghdad, Damascus, and Cordoba housed vast libraries and centers of learning where ancient Greek texts were preserved and expanded upon. This intellectual vibrancy was a product of the Islamic world's unique position as a bridge between civilizations. As European crusaders and merchants traveled to the Levant, they encountered these advanced civilizations, leading to a gradual transfer of knowledge. Muslim scholars such as al-Khwarizmi introduced European audiences to the Hindu-Arabic numeral system, including the concept of zero and rules of arithmetic, which revolutionized mathematics and made complex calculations more accessible. European mathematicians built upon these foundations, laying the groundwork for modern arithmetic. Similarly, Muslim astronomers made significant contributions to the understanding of the cosmos. Scholars like al-Battani and al-Biruni developed sophisticated instruments for measuring time and celestial bodies, refining astronomical tables and advancing the fields of trigonometry and optics. Their work not only enriched the body of astronomical knowledge, but also influenced the development of scientific methods and instruments in Europe. Another crucial aspect of the Crusades' legacy was the transmission of classical learning from Greece and Rome. Many Greek and Roman works that had been lost or forgotten in the West had been translated into Arabic and were now retranslated into Latin. Works by Aristotle, Euclid, and Hippocrates, alongside breakthroughs in algebra, astronomy, and medicine by scholars like al-Khwarizmi and Avicenna, began circulating in European universities. This influx of knowledge laid the groundwork for the Renaissance, a period of immense cultural and scientific revival in which European scholars rediscovered and studied the classical texts of antiquity. The Crusades also spurred advancements in navigation, trade, and military technology. The need to supply distant armies across the Mediterranean and in the Holy Land led to improvements in shipbuilding and logistics. European shipbuilders adopted new designs and techniques from their Muslim counterparts, allowing for larger and more efficient vessels. These developments not only aided in transporting troops and supplies, but also facilitated trade along Mediterranean routes. Exposure to Eastern innovations in weaponry and military tactics also influenced both sides. For example, the Crusades introduced European knights to the use of gunpowder and firearms initially employed by Muslim forces. This exposure sparked the development and adoption of gunpowder weapons in Europe, gradually transforming medieval warfare. It wasn't just science and technology that crossed over during the Crusades. Philosophy and literature also played a role in shaping European thought. Muslim philosophers like Averroes, known for his commentary on Aristotle, influenced Christian thinkers in the West who in turn engaged with and sometimes challenged these ideas. This cross-cultural exchange stimulated intellectual debate and helped broaden perspectives. While the Crusades brought about significant advancements and exchanges, it is essential to acknowledge their darker aspects. The relentless warfare during the Crusades bred deep-seated animosity between Christians, Muslims, and even Jews who often faced violent persecution during these campaigns. The sack of Constantinople during the Fourth Crusade, the brutal massacres of civilians, and the prolonged state of conflict left scars that endured for generations. Historian Thomas Madden captures this duality, stating, "The Crusades were one of the most momentous, influential, and controversial episodes in the history of medieval Europe and the medieval Mediterranean world. They fundamentally altered the relationship between East and West, between Christianity and Islam, and the way people lived in both Europe and the Near East. The establishment of trade routes between Europe and the Middle East also had profound consequences. The flow of goods and ideas was facilitated by merchant guilds and trading companies, such as the Venetian and Genoese republics, which benefited greatly from the Crusades. European merchants gained access to lucrative markets in the East, while Muslim merchants expanded their networks westward. This economic exchange helped stimulate the growth of towns and cities along trade routes, contributing to the expansion of European commerce. The Crusades significantly impacted the political landscape of the Mediterranean region. The establishment of Crusader states in the Levant, such as the Kingdom of Jerusalem, created a complex web of political alliances and rivalries. These states interacted with neighboring Muslim principalities, often forming temporary truces or engaging in diplomatic exchanges. The Crusades also had repercussions beyond the Holy Land. For example, the Children's Crusade, though ultimately unsuccessful, reflected the widespread fervor and impact of these campaigns across Europe. Similarly, the internal conflicts and power struggles among the Crusader states themselves added another layer of complexity to the political dynamics of the region. Despite their immense impact, the Crusades eventually came to an end. The collapse of the Crusader states and the subsequent Mongol invasions marked the decline of European involvement in the Holy Land. However, the legacy of the Crusades continued to resonate long after the campaigns had ended, shaping perceptions of the medieval world. Historians have long grappled with assessing the Crusades' legacy, with differing perspectives offering interpretations that continue to evolve. Supporters of the Crusades argue that they represent a heroic chapter in European history, emphasizing the courage of the knights and the establishment of Christian states in the Holy Land. They highlight the cultural exchange and the introduction of classical learning back to Europe, contributing to the intellectual foundations of the Renaissance. Conversely, critics of the Crusades condemn them as brutal, fanatical, and unjustifiable acts of religious intolerance. They emphasize the devastating consequences for local populations, the destruction of cultural heritage, and the deep-rooted animosity sown between religious communities. In reality, the Crusades were a complex phenomenon driven by a multitude of factors. Religious zeal, Political ambition and economic interests all played a part in motivating European rulers and commoners alike. The Crusades also occurred within a broader context of medieval society, shaped by feudalism, the Catholic Church's influence, and the spirit of adventure that permeated the era. It was a time when European nations were consolidating their power and expanding their influence beyond their borders. The Crusades provided an opportunity to do just that. Evaluating the Crusades' impact requires a nuanced approach that considers both the positive and negative aspects of this historical period. On one hand, the Crusades did contribute to cultural exchange and the transmission of knowledge between East and West. European scholars rediscovered classical texts, astronomical discoveries, and mathematical innovations that had flourished in the Islamic world. This intellectual exchange laid the groundwork for the Renaissance and the scientific revolution. Additionally, the Crusades spurred advancements in navigation, trade, and military technology. Improvements in shipbuilding, the adoption of accounting practices, and the introduction of gunpowder weapons illustrate the practical benefits that emerged from this era. Furthermore, the Crusades had a profound impact on the political landscape of the Mediterranean, creating new states and alliances that reshaped the region's dynamics. On the other hand, the Crusades were marked by immense violence and religious intolerance. The brutal massacres of Muslims and Jews, the sack of cities like Constantinople, and the establishment of a climate of fear and suspicion had lasting consequences for interfaith relations. The Crusades also resulted in significant loss of life, the destruction of cultural heritage, and the imposition of foreign rule on local populations. The human cost and the societal upheaval caused by these campaigns cannot be ignored. When looking at the Crusades, it is important to avoid generalizations and instead adopt a multifaceted perspective. Rather than viewing the Crusades as a monolithic event, it is crucial to examine the distinct phases, motivations, and consequences of each campaign. The Crusades were a series of distinct military expeditions spanning nearly 2 centuries, each with its own set of circumstances and outcomes. Recognizing this complexity allows for a more accurate understanding of the nuances involved. Furthermore, acknowledging the agency and experiences of those beyond European Christians is essential. While the Crusades are often Eurocentric, it is important to consider the perspectives and actions of Muslim, Jewish, and other non-European actors. Exploring their narratives provides a more comprehensive and balanced portrayal of this historical period. Ultimately, assessing the Crusades' impact requires a nuanced approach that considers both the advancements and the atrocities that occurred during this era. The Crusades were a catalyst for cultural exchange and the transmission of knowledge, but they were also marked by violence, intolerance, and immense suffering. Recognizing this complexity allows us to learn from the mistakes of the past and work towards a more inclusive and tolerant future. And with that, I want to thank you all for joining me today and listening to my talk about the Crusades. If there are any questions you might have, please feel free to reach out to me through the provided means. Thank you again for this wonderful opportunity.